Okay, and I'm guessing that we are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the second session on the book reading club from the VJUG about the book that Tony wrote, that's right here with us, the Java Design Pattern Essentials. My name is Roberto Cortez, and I have here with me Ivan as well.
Yeah, and my son also said hello.
and apparently Ivan Skid as well wants to join us.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Hello everybody.
So I ask our viewers to please join us on RC. You can join us if you go to virtualjug.com. You can join us there, and you can ask the questions for this session on the RC, and I will gladly relay them to Tony. Before going that, let's go just a really quick presentation about everyone. So I'm Roberto Cortez. I'm working for Tommy Tribe, working most of the stuff, Java EE stuff, and I'm doing this book reading club session for you guys. Ivan?
So I'm Ivan Ivanov. I work for SAP, and in my spare time, I'm contributing to open source projects like jQuery Forge, for example, and I'm also one of the leads of the Bulgarian Java user group.
Okay. Tony, do you want to introduce yourself as well, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm Tony. I'm the author of the book, and I've been involved in software development since I was 17 years old, so well over 30 years now. And I currently work as a lecturer at the Open University in the UK, and I do other software developments in Java and PHP primarily. And of course, I've written books.
Awesome. Thank you again for joining us for this session to allow us to ask questions about your book and some really cool Java questions that we might have. I'm guessing that you, Ivan, already have some questions that you want to start with, right?
Yeah, I'd like to remind our audience that, again, you can use our chat, our IRC, and the virtual Juke page. So you can ask your questions. And today, the topic is behavioral patterns, the way they are defined in the Gang of Four book. So the Java design patterns are following them, and they have some Java parts inside. So let me start with the first question that I prepared before everybody warms up. So when we talk about behavioral patterns, we talk about behavior, right? So when it comes to behavior, everything that comes to my mind with Java 8 is lambdas, and of course functional programming. So there's a lot of noise around functional programming today, even though it's there since the roots of the programming at all. So what do you think about, Tony, what do you think about functional programming? And do you think that Java can be used in functional style as functional language?
Well, it can be used in functional style. I think if you have a background in functional programming, then it all seems very natural in languages that were designed as functional languages to start with, whereas it's not a natural paradigm for Java programmers because you have to think in a different way. Now, lambdas gives you perhaps a nice way that gives you a more concise and precise way of expressing something, so that's good. But there's a paradigm shift that you have to get into. Talking about functional programming more generally, if you're used to Java programming and it's normal, fairly standard object-oriented ways of doing things, then the functional way is a different way of looking at it. So you have to get your head around a different way. But there is the potential there for coding at a higher level of abstraction with functional programming, and I think that's a good thing. Whether it fits into Java in the long term, possibly. It's not something I use a lot myself because I don't come from a functional programming background. So I come from originally procedural programming and then object-oriented. So it's not something that I'm overly concerned about, but I think it maybe has the potential to become used more and more. but there are downsides for it. Performance can be a problem sometimes in certain aspects, and as I said, getting your head around some of the different ways of thinking compared to what you're used to. If you spent any years programming in object-oriented languages like Java, all of a sudden you've got to think in a different way.
And since you're bringing that topic up, by the way, since we have like a lot of people that are with us that probably didn't experience functional programming before, are starting to experience it now, what are your thoughts on how we should transition between an object-oriented mindset to a functional programming mindset? How do you do that shift?
I think a bit at a time would be the way I would do it. So start with your lambdas, get used to the different syntax, and starting to get your head around what that's trying to achieve and the way it's trying to achieve it in a more concise and precise way, and just build it up from there. Yeah, if you try and do too much at once, then it might become a bit overwhelming, because functional programming has this more sort of a mathematical style to it, which is a different mindset. So I would say take it one little bit at a time. That's how I personally would do it.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I haven't made a huge amount of use of it myself. I've got so much of a background in normal OO programming that I tend, for the most part, to stick with what's familiar.
Great.
Because it works well and efficiently.
Yeah, of course.
And you could say if it isn't broke, don't fix it. So, but
yeah,
it isn't to say that it can't be improved with functional stuff as well. But for me personally, there hasn't been a compelling reason to move to it.
Okay, we understand. What will be a compelling reason to do it then?
I think if you can program in a high level of abstraction, because to me, anything that saves you time in programming is a good thing. However, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that it's important to programming to write programs that are easy for people to understand. It's all very well writing programs that computers understand and can execute well, but ultimately, few of us work alone. Some of us do, but usually we work in teams, or our classes get reused by others, and they like to look for the source, and they like to see it's all easy to understand, well documented. So it's important, whatever style you use, to make it easy for another person to understand what's going on. And sometimes in functional programming, if you're not used to it, you can be a little bit more cryptic. It can appear to be more cryptic if you're not used to that style.
Don't you consider the functional style where you tell the computer what to do and not how to do it? So don't you consider it more readable in a sense?
It can be, yes, it can be, and that's the important thing. So that's coming back to this doing it at the higher level of abstraction, where you're doing exactly what you said, telling it what to do, not how to do it. So I'm all for that. So yes, I'm just thinking of other things in functional programming where it might not be as so obvious until you're used to it. It's that getting over that bridge of moving your mindset from one way of thinking to a slightly different way of thinking. And bearing in mind your code might need to be read and analysed by other people and reused by other people.
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm. Ivan, I believe you have a couple of other questions there.
Yeah, sure. So while we are at the functional programming style area, one of the main points in functional programming is to keep everything immutable.
Yes.
So if we look at the book, and in more particular in the command pattern chapter, the client class, which is the speech recognizer, it is designed to be mutable. So the commands are passed with a setter.
Yes.
Now, would you consider changing that to immutable and the commands so that the commands can be passed and are passed in the constructor rather than in the setter? What do you think about this approach?
Yes. Well, just backtracking to the principle of having immutable objects, I think that's really good. If you can make a class immutable, then do so, because you'll make automatically it's thread safe. You don't have to worry about leaking data from methods, so it's a good thing to have immutable objects. In the terms of the command pattern, in the example in the book, the speech recognizer class, it hears a voice command, but depending in the context in which it hears it, it depends on what you do. So if it hears the word up, in one context it opens the window, and in another context it puts up the volume. So that's why that particular example used a setter method rather than setting it immutably in the constructor.
So however, you can change the contexts.
Yes, you can change. So the example in the book had different contexts for the command. So that's why it was set like that. However, it's possible, of course, to set it up in a different way.
Yeah, okay. And actually, we have like kind of like a related question from the one that Ivan just threw there. So this is from Gautam, and he's asking, also with the recent emphasis on functional style programming and use of immutable objects, don't you think that in the prototype pattern should be deprecated? Why should we clone an immutable object?
Yes. Typically, if you deprecate something, you want to replace it with something that's better, rather than just deprecate it, because somebody somewhere will want to use a facility. So I'd be wary of deprecating it unless you actually can replace it with something that's better, more efficient, or easier to understand, or etc. So yeah, clone is not something that I use very often, personally.
Okay. And did you have any idea on what should replace this if for some reason gets deprecated?
Not really. When you're writing a class, a technique is the copy constructor, where you have a constructor that takes a reference to an object of the same type. So you're doing effectively the cloning inside your constructor. Of course, that's a facility that's already there. It's just a technique that you can use. So the default clone, I believe, is just it doesn't go deep. So it just clones the individual objects rather than the complete map. So there's perhaps being aware of what clone does and doesn't do. But I personally don't see a reason to deprecate clone. It's there in case you want to use it. I don't think it's used massively, but it's there in case you do. So I have no strong opinion about it, really.
Okay. Ivan, do you mind keeping going with the questions?
Sure. So while we are at the command pattern, I have another question about that. One of the key features of the pattern is that you can make your commands undoable. But some of the commands are not really undoable. Some of them are undoable, but some are not undoable. For example, if we take a desktop application, opening a document, file open, for example, that's not undoable. I mean, you cannot press Control-Z and close it. So at the moment, the book designs this with two methods on the command interface: execute and undo.
Yes.
Would you consider modeling this with a different interface, which is something like undoable, that extends command and that is implemented only by the commands that are undoable?
Yes, I would. Yes. I definitely think that's a better implementation in a production level software, certainly, because otherwise you end up making undo an optional operation, i.e. one that's implemented sometimes and not implemented other times, and then you end up having to either do nothing or throw an exception. So it's cleaner and a nicer design to have a separate interface, just as Ivan just suggested, which extends the basic command interface. So it extends it with an undo method. So yes, I think that is a better design. Clearly for the book is just giving you a starting point and pointing out that undo is a frequently required aspect for this pattern. So it just puts it in the same interface. But yes, in a better design, it would be a separate interface that extends the command one, I think.
Okay.
Ivan, you can go on, please.
Okay. Our audience is not so active at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, let's go on to the iterator pattern. So the Java iterator interface in the Java util, I guess, was iterator. So it has an additional functionality compared to the original proposal in the Gang of 4 book, and it's the removing object from the underlying collection. So basically, in Java, this is the only valid way to change the collection that you iterate over.
Yes.
So, what is your opinion on using that method? Do you use it often, and do you tend to change your collection while iterating it?
No, I don't tend to do that. It's nice to know that you can if you need to, and as you pointed out, the only safe way of doing it is to do it through the iterator's remove method. Of course, you do have to be careful that you don't have another thread which could modify that at the same time. So, you know, that's really your only caveat in doing that. I don't have a problem with having the remove method in there. It's nice. It's a nice thing to have in case you need it. I don't use it. I don't need it very often. You might perhaps have your data stored in a map, and so if you need to remove something, you remove it from the map. The iterator is really typically just when you're processing a set of data rather than modifying it. So I don't think it's something you can need to use very often, and I think there are better ways of doing it. I think you could make an argument that if you're removing from the iterator, perhaps you should instead be removing from the underlying data set of which it is the iterator. But nonetheless, I think the designers of Java probably put it in there just for convenience, just to make your life easier when you're coding. So as long as you're aware of the potential for it to throw the concurrent modification exception, and you're able to prevent that, then that's fine.
Okay, let me see. I think we have a couple of questions here from our audience. Yeah, here we go. So actually, I think this question is not really from this part of the book, but still is a question from our audience. So this is from SM Christea. He's asking about, in terms of the visitor pattern, is it used to separate the hierarchy implementation for his behavior?
Is it used? Sorry, is it used to separate?
Separate hierarchy implementation for his behavior.
Well, the purpose for a visitor is so that you can have additional functionality added to a class without having to change that class. Ultimately, that's really what it's there for. But it does require you to have the foresight to add something in the first place so it has that facility. I was trying to think of some examples earlier today of where it's actually used in the Java API, and I was struggling to think of anything until I stumbled across annotations, which I think might make some use of it. But I don't think it's a very widely used pattern. But it's quite big. But it's quite a useful one to have. So if you've got the foresight to add this visitor pattern into a class, because you know that it's likely that you're going to need to have extra functions in the future, but you don't want anybody changing the source code, or you think it's not going to be available to change the source code, then it's a nice pattern to in your toolbox. I'm not sure if that answers the question really, because it was talking about the implementation. So
you said that yeah, if I can go on with this pattern, you said that you couldn't find a way to use the visitor pattern in the JDK, but do you know some real life use of the visitor pattern, or can you think of some real use?
Yes. From my IDE, I use NetBeans, and an extension of that is the NetBeans platform, which is its desktop-based rich client platform. And that includes a class, a pattern called a lookup. And with a lookup, many of the built-in NetBeans classes, especially around presentation and graphical classes, they have a getLookup method. And this gives you precisely this thing. It gives you this way of adding in extra objects to a class that gives you extra functionality. And you can have as many as you want in all kinds of different ways. So that's one. It's not perhaps the classical visitor pattern as written in the book, but it's kind of achieving a similar aim in that it means you're not having to change the original source code. You're just adding these objects to a lookup area, which is effectively like it's basically a map, a sophisticated map. But it gives you these extra functionalities that you can plug in whenever you want to a base class. So that's perhaps the nearest I could find that I can think of at the moment that goes to a visitor.
Mm-hmm.
That's used widely in NetBeans anyway.
Cool.
Okay.
So we have here a question from Arlen Z. He's actually asking what is the difference between the Facade and the Proxy pattern?
The Facade and the Proxy, was there?
And the Facade?
The Facade and the Proxy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the Facade is to simplify things. It's to give a simpler way of accessing something that's complex. So you might have multiple objects in multiple classes with multiple methods, and trying to make use of that is potentially time consuming. You need to have go through all the documentation of which method do I need from which object, how do I combine these together to achieve a particular aim. So by having a Facade, you're simplifying it. You might just be one object of one class with a series of simple methods, and those methods do all like the hard work behind the scenes of talking to the other objects and calling those methods. So it's making life simple. Proxy is having typically it's when you've got the remote connections, so like your remote interfaces. So yeah, I'm trying to think what example we had in the book now, because it's been a while since I read that one, but yeah, they do have a different purpose. Facade is simplifying it, and Proxy is more connecting things, typically when one is local and one is remote.
Cool. Ivan, do you care to continue, please?
Yes, I'm running out of questions, by the way, so we
don't
want
worry.
our audience to be a little bit more active. So,
Yeah, don't worry.
jumping to the mediator and observer patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the book, in the chapter of the mediator pattern, you mentioned that you can reduce coupling if instead of that, someone is using the observer pattern.
Okay.
Is there any particular use case when you would recommend using observer instead of mediator, changing mediator to observer?
Mm-hmm. I would personally prefer to use observer rather than mediator. Just because of the basic principle that you want to reduce coupling for maintenance purposes in the future. With the standard mediator, A refers to B and B refers to A, so they have to be used as a unit, which might be fine, but to me it seems cleaner and more reusable if you have the observer pattern so that only B needs to refer to A and not the other way around, for example. So to me, I think you can achieve the same results with observer as you can in mediator much of the time. So I prefer it. I would always choose observer over mediator if I can possibly do that.
Okay.
So we have another question here. This is from, let me see, get it right, Carl Joki. Would you use an interface in a system when there is only one implementation, or wait until there is more than one implementation to then introduce the interface?
Why not?
Hello?
Hello, yes. The screen went static for a moment.
Okay.
Did you hear my answer there?
No, we lost you. So I think we didn't even got the first sentence from the answer. So can you please repeat it? Hello, Tony, are you there? Guessing that Tony is having some difficulties. Yeah, let's see if he gets back. If Tony, are you
I don't
here?
know whether.
Oh, Tony apparently is around, but having some problems. In the meanwhile, I'm going to ask Ivan to dance for us.
No, I don't want to do that.
So we can entertain our audience.
Maybe something else. Why don't you sing?
I can't sing, but I'm guessing that you could.
No.
Tony, are you with us? I'm guessing he's not. So, actually, having a couple of more audience questions from the audience, and actually, people here that are requesting even to dance or to sing or to do something. So, you cannot disappoint our audience.
Now I'm a rock star, right?
So you have to do it. Yeah, Tony disconnected, so let's wait for a while to see if he returns.
Yeah.
In the meanwhile, for the audience that's still with us, hopefully you don't go away with this mindless glitch. I remind you that you can join us on our IRC channel. You can go to virtualjug.com, join us there, and join the IRC channel, and you can send your questions so we can ask them to Tony, or if you're not able to answer them now, we can ask them on the next session. So that's that. Also, I also like to take this opportunity to start announcing our next session. That's going to be in a couple of weeks, most likely, and it's going to be like the third session for this book and final session as well. Ivan, did you have a chance to look into the topics for the next session already?
Yes. So far, the first two parts of our book reading club, they were on the three parts that were discussing mostly the Gang of Four patterns. Now, in the last session that we are going to do in 2 or 3 weeks, we are going to concentrate on some patterns that are not there in the Gang of Four book, but are commonly used, especially in Java programs. For example, the model view controller pattern. So we are going to discuss them, and I think it will be a really interesting discussion because the topics are really broad. All these patterns evolved a lot after the book was written, so we may throw in some new stuff. So I'm looking forward to that, to that session, because it will be really interesting.
Awesome, that's great news. So we're looking forward to look into that. I'm guessing Tony's joining us again.
Back. Welcome back, Tony.
Tony. Oh, I guess we lost him again. Hello, Tony, can you hear us? We can't hear you. We listen to you with some minor cuts, so he's
Hello?
almost back. I'm guessing he has.
Yes, it keeps dropping in and out.
Okay, but apparently we can hear you now.
Yeah, now it's better.
Are you there? Yeah, so Tony, you might want to switch off your camera. It might give you a little more bandwidth just for the voice. That's all what we need at the moment. That was actually a suggestion from Source Wind from our IRC channel, so thank you so much. Well, hopefully Tony fixed the issue on his side. Unfortunately, these kind of problems, we have no idea how to fix them sometimes when you have like network problems, and if it's like a network provider error, there's not really nothing we can do. Anyway, we have a guest 48568 asking us what's going to be the date of the next session. So we don't have a fixed date yet, but hopefully we will make it in the next couple of weeks. When we have a date available, we're going to publish it on the Meetup website, and we're going to email it to the Meetup and the VCHUG mailing list. So you're going to be able to see it when that's going to happen. And but definitely you're going to make it before the end of the year, so somewhere around December, and before Christmas, of course. And while we're talking about that, me and Ivan, we're also planning our next book reading club session, starting with a new book, starting with a new author as well. So we're planning to do that on the next year, and most likely the topic is going to be one of the runner-up topics from the last poll on meetup.com. That was Java E, right?
Yes, we can do Java E. There are a lot of books there, and most of the authors there are regular VCHUG presenters, so they know how it works.
Mm-hmm. So Tony is trying to join us again. Hello, Tony. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Tony, you might want to switch off your camera. So
okay.
So it might get more bandwidth just for your voice, and it might
right.
hold
Okay.
that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can hear you now. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, awesome. So let me see so what was the question that you
The question was about interfaces. Would you consider having an interface if there's one concrete implementation, or you would add an interface after you have a second or third implementation?
Yeah, exactly. So this question was actually from Carl Joki. Carl Joke. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's fine to have an interface just for one, or just for one implementation. Interfaces give you a specification, which is very useful for reuse and for putting in as method argument types. So yes, I think it's perfectly fine to have an interface for a single use like that. I've done that many times, and I think it's fine personally.
Yeah, I usually done that many times as well, especially when you using stuff on Java EE like CDI or AJBs. They're very useful in that particular technologies. Anyway, we have another question here. So this is from the same user, Carl Jolk, and he's asking how to appropriately use exceptions in an API.
How to use exceptions in an API. I'd perhaps like to know what the questioner is wanting to achieve. Are they asking should you use the throws clause in the?
Yeah, I'm guessing. I mean, this is like an old debate. I mean, should the API throw an exception? Should the API throw an object with some behavior there? Should it throw null?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think exceptions are good myself. However, what's the purpose behind an exception? Java divides it, as we know, into two types. You have your checked exceptions and your unchecked exceptions. So your checked exceptions are ones for things that you can't prevent. So your input-output errors. You know, you're expecting to read a file and the file doesn't exist because somebody's gone and deleted it. So you need a way of handling that, and exceptions are useful there. So, or if this exception occurs, something unexpected has happened which is outside of my control as a programmer. But the other type of exception is your things like your null pointers and your illegal state exceptions are your unchecked exceptions, and really they're your bugs. Yeah, you shouldn't be getting those in your final production software. But if you're writing it, then what you do if you've got a precondition on a particular method, so a certain state must be true before this method is called, what happens if that state isn't true? You have to do something. To me, an exception is a good way of trapping and detecting what your bugs are. So you could return a null instead, but if you're doing that, then you've got to test, am I getting a null back in order to know if you've got a bug? So I think exceptions are a good thing, and I do use them for that purpose. If I get an exception and I shouldn't be, I know I've got a bug still that needs to be ironed out. So yeah, I think you should use exceptions myself.
Okay.
Because like I said, if you return something else, you might miss it.
So for instance, if you're validating a business object with some logic built in, would you rather use like an exception when you, for instance, when you're checking for a required field on that object, or will you use an optional from Java 8 now? Just an example.
Traditionally, I think I would use the exception. Yes. I think mainly because I've got into the habit of doing that. That isn't to say the Java 8 way might not be better, but it may be. I haven't really used that Java 8 much, so I've got used to using exceptions, I think, and I found them work well for me.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question from the audience, also from Karl Jolk, asking when should and should not use dependency injection. So this is like a very, very debatable question that we probably all already debated with some friends or some colleagues all the time. But what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's not something I really do, is the honest answer. So I can't give a really good answer on that because I don't. It's not something that I do. I tend to find other ways of doing things. So yes, I'm afraid I can't give a good answer to that question.
Okay. Would you rather not use dependency injection and use something else then?
Yes, I can't think of an example at the moment. So yes, it's not something that I've used really.
Okay. Ivan, do you have a couple of more questions that you want to ask?
I think there is a question that arrived in the virtual jerk as a comment to our in meetup from Lal Wanis. Got a question. Can you give a good example of factory abstract and factory method? I guess it's abstract factory and factory method in Java Standard API.
Right. Off the top of my head, no. I can't think of them right now, no, because I just haven't been looking behind the scenes into what the APIs are doing and what patterns they're implementing. I've tended to use those patterns when I'm writing my own stuff, where I thought it would be useful. So offhand, I can't think of them in the Java API. That isn't to say they aren't used. I just can't think off the top of my head.
I think for factory methods there's a lot of these of methods, especially after Java 7. So collection or it was instance of in the datetime API in Java 8, and now in Java 9 we are getting collection factory methods for creating new maps and new lists. Arrays. What was that? Arrays of that creates the list. So there is a lot of factory methods in Java. Myself, I also can't remember of an abstract factory in the Java API. Maybe something in Swing or AWS, I don't know.
I just had a thought about document builder. There's something going through my head about the document builder.
I think the XML API has some abstract factories there. I think.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah. They're not classes that I really made a lot of use of, so that's probably why I'm not so familiar with whether they use that pattern. I'm just thinking they possibly do.
Okay, so we have here another question from Earthwind, and he's asking if you think that when a method returns void, isn't that kind of a waste? For instance, for servers, by default they are generated void, but they definitely should be returning this instead, so you can actually chain the methods all together to do multiple calls.
Okay, although if you've managed to call a method that's a setter method, you'd already have a reference to that object anyway. So you're talking about chaining, but can you not chain anyway?
Well, if the only difference will be, you have the reference and you have to put a line and say like object A dot set wherever,
Yep.
object A dot set wherever, and
Yeah.
all that time. I'm guessing that with chaining methods, you will just do
Yes.
like
Yes.
A
Yes.
dot set,
Mm-hmm.
A dot
Okay.
set, dot set, dot set, dot set, dot
Yes,
set.
I see where you're going now. Yeah. So by returning the this, you could do that chaining in one statement. Yes, certainly you could. Where that would have an impact potentially is on the Java beans patterns. So, you know, if it's relying on the convention that Java has created, where the setters return void, then that might have an impact there, possibly.
Yeah, I can see what you mean, but it shouldn't be. Well, I'm guessing that there might be libraries that are maybe by reflection, but they usually don't care about the return type of the method. They usually only care about the name plus the argument. So
yes, probably that's true. Yes,
that should be fine. Anyway, do you think there is any is there any reason for having void methods this way? Shouldn't we just return an object all the time, even if it's just like the instance object, so we can do over it?
I think like a lot of us, we get into the habit of using void because that's the convention. I can see a good argument for always returning an object because, like you say, it gives you that extra flexibility. So yeah, I think you could make a very good argument to do that. I've been guilty of not doing it, like I think a lot of people have, and just using void, where you've got a fairly standard setter method. But yeah, I think you could make a very good argument that you get more flexibility if you do return something. Yeah.
Cool. Ivan, do you have more questions on your side?
Yes, sure, I have. So going back to the observers, talking about observers and observables, there is one other hype these days, and that's the reactive programming style. So there's even a manifesto, reactive manifesto. So what is your opinion on that hype, that particular hype about being reactive?
I haven't been involved too much in the hype about reactive. Just to be clear that everyone knows what we're talking about. So I believe we're talking about the constructs where if you say you have three variables, A, B, and C, all integers, and you say A equals B plus C, then if you subsequently change the value of B or C, then normally we wouldn't expect A to change, but with reactive you would expect A to change in synchronization with the other ones. It's similar to my answer about functional programming. It's getting used to that paradigm that's different to what we're used to. So if you're used to this reactive way and you're expecting it and you know what's going to happen, then that's fine. With Java, we're not expecting that to happen. It goes against everything that we were taught originally. So there will be a danger.
Guess we lost Tony again. Tony, are you with us? Okay, I'm guessing that Tony is having the internet issues again. At least we got him for a while again. Let's hope he can make it back. So actually, Ivan is chatting. Ivan, are you hear me? Ivan, can you hear me? Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Roberto.
Okay. I'm guessing maybe it was my connection that
Yeah, I was hearing you the whole time, but you couldn't hear me for a short while.
Oh, okay. Ivan, are you with us? Okay, Ivan can hear me, but he's not chatting. Well, yeah, I'm not exactly sure if the audience got your question because I couldn't hear you, but I'm guessing it was relayed anyway.
About reactive programming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just saying that it's a different way of thinking compared to what we're used to. We're not used to having a variable that changes in synchronization with another variable unless we've set up an observer. But then we know that we've set up the observer. With reactive programming, it's more an automated thing, which is fine if you know that and understand it and it's consistent. But we're not used to that as Java programmers. We're not used to that happening unless we've specifically set up an observer to make these things work in synchronization. So the question was about the hype about it. I haven't been involved in the hype about it, so I think I've been around too many years to believe lots of hype.
Yeah, there's always a lot of hype every year.
Yeah.
I wonder when all the apps are gonna come together and actually happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's see. I think we have a couple more questions here. So I have a question from Gautam, and he's asking, isn't the breach pattern trying to solve a problem that DI containers have solved already?
Sorry, that what is solved already?
Dependency injection containers.
Possibly. That may be the case. As I mentioned in an earlier question, I haven't really used dependency injection, so I'm not sure I can answer that question.
And we also have a cloning question related with the one that we were discussing a while ago. So this is on chapter 19. Will it not implementing cloning be a better idea? Also, please note that it's possible to serialize not only to a file system, you can serialize to some memory-based byte stream or array. This is from Audrius.
Yes, that's a good point actually. Yes, I can't remember when that facility came in to Java. I don't know if you know, Roberto.
Yeah, yes, I can figure that out.
Potential there.
Ivan, do you have more questions on your side?
I have one more question here.
Okay, let's do the final question then, and then wrap this up. We're almost
it's almost over. So it's on the chain of responsibility pattern. The example given in the book involves many method calls for finding the class responsible for a certain task. So would you implement that somehow differently? For example, with the facade, holding a map with the types of the tasks, and then the corresponding class that takes care of fulfilling the tasks. So, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes, you could achieve it that way. I think one of the keys of the chain of responsibility is that you have this sequence in which it checks things. So it tries this first. If it can handle it, great. If it can't, it passes on to the next in the chain. So if you can achieve the same thing using a facade and a map, then why not? I didn't think of that when I was writing the book, but it's an interesting way of doing it a different way. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, so actually, it's not your pattern; it's the Gang of Four pattern. But
yes,
what way would you prefer, you personally?
Yeah. I think I would have to try both and compare them, to be honest. I haven't really used chain very much in my own programming, but the idea that you know, one object just references the next in turn. To me, that's a fairly simple implementation. So I don't see a huge amount that's complex about it personally.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'm guessing that we're going to wrap this up now. So thank you so much for all the readers and all the viewers from this session, and thank you so much for sending in your questions. Thank you also, Ivan, for all the questions that you already have prepared here for Tony. And of course, thank you again, Tony, for joining us for this session about the book review that you actually wrote.
You're welcome.
So we know when you were off, we actually mentioning here to the audience that we're going to make a third and last session about the last part of the book.
Okay.
So we would love to have you here again if you would like to join us.
Of course, I certainly do my best to join you again.
Cool. So we're gonna try to figure out the date and we're gonna announce it then, so the audience can subscribe and join us again.
Okay.
In the meanwhile, thank you again for everyone to join us, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.